Good morning. As you might well imagine, being an innovation and technology strategist, I'm frequently asked for forecasts. And whenever I am, I always try to bear in mind the words of that great American philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said, "Making predictions is very hard, especially about the future." Nevertheless, I'm going to go out on a limb today and make a few predictions. So please, join me on a short trip to the near future of state government. It's a hot one at the state capitol, 106 degrees. But nothing compared to what's predicted. Temperatures well in excess of 110 for nearly the next week. So the HVAC systems cooling the state office building are running full tilt. Suddenly, a sensor embedded in one of the primary blower motors detects an inordinate amount of wear, even though routine maintenance is not scheduled yet for another several weeks. The demands of climate change have put additional wear on key parts. The motor likely only has a day or two of service left. At best, it needs to be replaced immediately. And this poses a problem as neither the primary nor either of the backup HVAC maintenance vendors has this blower motor or any other compatible one in stock. In the past, this would have meant shutting the building down, perhaps for several days, while the necessary parts were located and delivered at great expense to the state and inconvenience for both state employees and visiting constituents. But no longer. Instead, the state's infrastructure maintenance system launches an intelligent procurement agent onto the internet, searching for current and prospective new providers of a version of this blower motor certified to work with this HVAC system in this building. It identifies several potential suppliers who provide blockchain-based non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, to certify the functionality of their product and to certify the sustainability of their operations. It gets quotes and availabilities from each of these and negotiates pricing, terms, and conditions with each before selecting the winning bidder and setting them up as a vendor in their procurement and accounts payable systems. It then executes an online smart contract confirming the price, terms, and conditions, immediately on completion of which the vendor ships the blower motor overnight, and a maintenance technician is scheduled to install the motor the next day. The entire time lapsed from the identification of the excess wear by the sensor to the confirmation of the overnight shipment by the vendor and the scheduling of the technician has required a grand total of 4 minutes. The next morning, when the blower motor arrives at the state office building, the HVAC maintenance technician notes that while she has installed blower motors many times before, she's never installed this particular blower motor on this specific HVAC system. Fortunately, it comes with instructions. She puts on her augmented reality goggles, and they overlay visual 3D projections of the step-by-step instructions directly onto the blower motor and the adjacent parts of the HVAC system into which she needs to install it. The work is completed on a timely basis, and despite the excessive temperatures outdoors, the building is maintained at a comfortable temperature for employees and visiting constituents alike. Now, is this pretty much the way that building maintenance works in your state today? Maybe not quite yet. Well, that's one example. The second example of the future actually isn't quite in the future. It's the leading edge of the present. And I want to tell you about a state that has implemented digital e-government to a degree not exceeded anywhere else that I'm aware of. In this state, all citizens can vote online securely, logging in to vote with a digital ID card. In fact, Each citizen can cast as many ballots as they want right up to the voting deadline, each ballot erasing, automatically canceling the previous ballot. Taxpayers with no business income can file returns in an average of 5 minutes versus an average of 8 hours for the US as a whole. E-residency allows digital entrepreneurs to manage businesses based here from anywhere in the world. They have over 50 use cases of AI, including chatbots, speech synthesis, information extraction, data access, and consent management. They've passed legislation declaring access to the internet as a basic human right. Despite having multiple private healthcare providers, any doctor with any healthcare provider can see any patient's records whenever and wherever necessary, so long as they have consent from the patient to see those records. 99% of all public services are available as e-services. This saves over 1,400 person-years of working time, 2% of its economy on an annual basis. And a once-only policy means that anytime any citizen enters any information into any state system, they never have to enter that same information into any other state system ever again. All relevant information is automatically shared among all state agencies who need it. So by now, you're probably wondering which state it is that is so far ahead. Those of you from smaller states are probably saying, well, it's got to be one of the great big states. Who else is going to have the budget to do all this kind of stuff? Those of you from the big states are probably saying, well, it's got to be one of the little states, because after all, how could any large state get their arms around all this kind of digital transformation at once? Well, if you're having trouble thinking of it, here's a couple of clues. It's between West Virginia and Maryland in area, and it's between Montana and Maine in population. So yes, you would call it a small state. And if you haven't figured out yet what state it is that I'm referring to, it may be because you're not thinking outside of the box. Because I didn't say that it was one of the 50 United States of America. In fact, the state that I'm referring to is actually the nation of Estonia. And in Estonia, every single one of these digital e-government capabilities is already fully in place. It sets a standard that all of us can aim for. So what's going to allow the kinds of innovation taking place in Estonia today and our hypothetical near future scenario within the next few years to take place? Well, first of all, a host of new technologies are rapidly emerging. Everything from autonomous robotics to explainable AI to augmented and virtual reality, additive manufacturing or 3D printing, Internet of Things, blockchain and Web3. Often it's a combination of emerging technologies that bring about the most opportunity for positive disruptive change. For example, if you combine Internet of Things, wireless technologies, and cloud-native computing, you enable what we are beginning to refer to as the sharing or outcomes-based economy. Now, all of us are familiar with this. How many people took a ride share from the airport to get to the hotel? Let me see your hands. Okay, it looks like probably a majority of us did. Uber, Airbnb are other examples of that, but there's a wide range of other applications. For example, GE Aviation no longer sells its jet engines to airlines. It leases them by the hour of flight time, with GE taking responsibility for maintenance of the jet engine. So after an initial setup cost, the customer is just paying for the time it's actually used. That means the cost of the jet engine has moved from a large fixed cost to a variable cost aligned with usage, and because GE is incentivized to keep that engine working properly and properly maintained, it's reduced unscheduled downtime very significantly. We are very likely to see IT solutions sold much the same way, where we'll see cloud-based services that are not just business process as a service, but perhaps even in some cases, a department as a service. Data analytics is one of the keys to moving ahead. There's a common misconception that artificial intelligence is some obscure advanced capability sitting out there by itself that we may never actually get to, but it actually lies on a continuum, starting with data analytics, descriptive analytics. What happened? Business intelligence, having systems that give you up-to-date information. I'm often asked, Jack, can you help us figure out what we need to do to be able to predict the future? By people who are managing organizations that can't even predict the present. The systems that they're basing their decisions and actions on are providing information at best that's hours, days, or weeks out of date. So with business intelligence capabilities, you integrate in real time the ability to draw on all the data available to you. Predictive analytics does take it to the next step forward, where we look at if current trends stay the same, what are likely outcomes in the foreseeable future? And the third step, where we do start to get into AI capabilities, is prescriptive analytics. If those outcomes are not the most desirable outcomes that you're looking for, then what do we need to do differently to bring about a change that's going to produce those more desirable outcomes? One of the functions we're going to be seeing rapidly emerging are intelligent agents. Artificial intelligence is not a monolith. There are a host of different AI capabilities. We start with tremendous amounts of data coming out of the business infrastructure internally and exchanged electronically with external trading partners. Tools like big data analytics allow us to be able to crunch those numbers faster and more effectively than ever. But we also have to be able to draw on unstructured data that's coming from sources like emails and social media posts and even telephone voicemail messages, and interpret that into a structured format that will allow tools to be applied to it, such as associative memory for pattern recognition. And various AI tools, such as RPA, or robotic process automation. Stephanie Dedman and her team at Tennessee, for example, have more than 40 different use cases of RPA in production already, and 60 more under development. And a number of other states are already working with RPA. And it's a great way to get started moving toward AI. And then you can lay machine learning on top of that, and we'll see a couple of examples of that, and knowledge-based expert systems. The combination of these things enable intelligent agent technologies to be able to think, decide, and act to solve business problems in ways very analogous to how human experts in the field would, if they had access to all the data that these systems have access to, and could think and decide as quickly as computers can. And by feeding the results of those decisions and actions back into the decision management processes, these AI systems, integrated together with other emerging technologies, can provide continuous learning and continuous improvement in the way they go about supporting governmental operations. We're all familiar with the old 80-20 rule. The 20% of our best performers typically produce 80% of the results, whether it's sales in the private sector, whether it's procurement in the government sector, whether it's financial analyses that need to get done. Wouldn't it be great if we could take those 20% of our people who are the very best, most knowledgeable, most experienced, and have them mentor the other 80% of our people who are still learning, who are still gaining knowledge and experience and building judgment about how to make decisions and take actions in their jobs. Coach them through the decisions to help them get there quicker. Of course, the problem is we can't afford to take our 20% of the best people off of doing their jobs on a full-time basis in order to coach the rest. So all the rest have to learn through trial and all too expensive error. But with intelligent agent technologies, these IAs can shift the performance curve of those who are not yet at the top by providing them with the feedback that says, for example, are you certain this is the decision you want to make given this particular set of input data? Because if you do make this decision, a likely outcome is this. Perhaps you might want to consider making that decision, much as a more experienced mentor might be able to do if they did have time to look over their shoulder and coach them to improve. And at the same time, it can even improve the performance of those top 20% of your people by allowing them to spend less time with the routine information gathering and number crunching and more time actually applying that knowledge and experience and judgment that they have gained over the years. Now, one of the best examples that I've seen of AI enablement, I had a chance to talk with Alan Fuller and Dave Fletcher from Utah, and they're doing a number of leading edge things that I wanted to share with you. One, they're already using natural language processing for sentiment analysis. So they can listen to those voicemail messages or live calls from the public and translate them into data then that the governor's staff can use to prioritize the responses to those calls. They're using image recognition for cattle branding so that they can immediately determine if a heifer is discovered in a location that does not appear to be associated with the particular ranch that cattle brand is from, who that heifer actually does belong to, and whether or not we need to look into a problem with cattle rustling. Or if people want to file for a new brand, they can verify that the new brand is not overly similar to an existing brand, potentially causing confusion in the market. They have sensors feeding AI algorithms to analyze air quality. They're using AI for anti-fraud efforts to target suspicious applications for unemployment benefits. They have AI initiatives involving connected vehicles, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, and autonomous vehicles to improve traffic flows in the state. And they are also making extensive use of robotic process automation for such things as invoice processing, unemployment claims, and help desk. Other governmental AI use cases that are out there and being explored include in such areas as government services, healthcare, transportation, education, emergency services, public relations, and a host of others. The list goes on. Literally hundreds of potential use cases for various forms of AI in state government. And so far, the results have been good. A lot of this was started to put into place for the pandemic. And more than 2/3 of the states that have implemented AI tools as a result of the pandemic report very positive experiences, that they achieved or exceeded expectations. And in fact, less than 20% found that they actually, at this point at least, had fallen short of their expectations. So the end game we're trying to get to with AI is ultimately total process automation in terms of eliminating human involvement from standard routine operational processes, approvals, compliance, reporting, that sort of thing. Free our people up to do those things that require more judgment and creativity. Automating value creation, where machines can identify opportunities to make decisions and take actions on savings and value generation. Providing full spend transparency across government organizations. And to have agile partner ecosystems, as in the near future scenario I described, where you can dynamically identify potential suppliers, for example, and negotiate in real time to take actions and establish relationships and do business with them. And it's not just the end users who will be impacted by AI. Here's an example of AI applied to writing code for creating new systems. Now, in this simple example, what we're going to see is, and it runs for 8 minutes. I'm not going to take the full 8 minutes of your time, but we're going to look at about the first minute or so of how you might create a game. But this could just be as well be applied for building business applications too. So in this case, what we've done is identified a rocket ship, and by putting in a picture of a rocket ship, and then by putting in standard English language terms, here's what I want you to do. The OpenAI Codex automatically generates the appropriate code to begin to execute it. Make it smallish, crop it circularly. Make it be vertically centered, put it on the left side, eliminate the scroll bars. Well, we skipped ahead accidentally, but that's fine. I think you get the impression. Studies have shown this has got the potential to increase developers' productivity in writing and testing code by 10 times. So we're going to be seeing a change over the next few years as we see AI-enabled software development that I can only say is analogous to the change we saw back in the 1950s and 60s with the development of the first compilers, so that you could write code in languages, early languages like COBOL and Fortran and BASIC, for example, and subsequent to that, many more powerful ones than that, as opposed to actually having to write the code in assembler language underlying it. Now, one of the big challenges that many of you have said that they get pushback on from governmental agencies when it comes to AI is the fear on the part of agency staff. Well, wait a minute. How much do I want to get behind AI if all they're going to do is use it to come along and eliminate my job? And that kind of fear is understandable, but it's important to get the message across to them that there is good news about AI, and that is that AI will not replace government decision makers at any level. But the bad news for some of them, and for some of you, is that government decision makers at every level who know how to use AI-enabled tools and technologies will replace those who don't. So make sure that you help them understand that this is a very powerful tool that they need to understand how to use very effectively. Some of us with a few gray hairs on the top here can remember the days back, say, in the 1980s when people used to say very clearly, I just don't understand why I need to understand how to use a computer. It just doesn't make any sense. Computers are for computer programmers. I'm never going to learn how to use a computer. I won't ever need to do that for my job. Well, we don't hear that anymore. And we're going to be hearing the same thing about AI moving forward. Now, I'm not going to take your time to explain what blockchain is and how it works. But I must take a moment, based on my experience, for the few stragglers out there who think using blockchain means asking our constituents to pay their taxes in Bitcoin. No, please do not confuse cryptocurrency as one of thousands of potential applications with the underlying enabling set of technologies referred to as blockchain. It can be used for so much more. For example, in the whole area of procurement and supply chain, and we know supply chains are not a single linear chain, they are supply networks of products and services that we draw upon to be able to deliver government services. We've suppliers, transportation agencies that govern, or organizations that governmental agencies interact with, contractors, and the constituents themselves. But part of the problem we have is that even to the extent that we've been able to eliminate, even though we haven't done so fully just yet, the paperwork involved in the process, and mailed forms and faxes and so forth, even to the extent the data is moving electronically, what tends to happen is that it moves through the supply chain step by step from one siloed set of information to the next siloed set of information to the next. And if at any given point there's a delay or an error or a situation where this data simply doesn't get moved, then we've got people having to make decisions and take actions based on incomplete, outdated, or even entirely missing information, where the information exists, but they can't get at it at the time they need to make their decision. The difference with blockchain is by having a shared ecosystem, each of these entities participating in the processes does not have to rely on data being passed stepwise, one step at a time, up and down the supply chain, but can draw on data immediately posted into a common data pool securely shared across the ecosystem as a whole by blockchain, so that every single participant can see every bit of information that they are authorized to see at the moment that that information is posted and updated in the blockchain by any other participant in the process. One of the artifacts that's very important on blockchain technology is the ability to store what are called smart contracts, a computer program that can run on a blockchain and can take custody over assets on the blockchain and can track what has happened to date, and based on that, replicating the legal requirements of a standard contract or legal regulations, can then in turn respond to that incoming information or events by sharing new information and even triggering new additional events without any human intervention involved and required to make standard activities as required by law or agreed to in a contract take place. Now, EY put together a very nice, brief video clip with a couple of their executives talking about the applicability of blockchain for government, and I'd like to take the next couple of minutes to share that with you.
Spending public money on behalf of citizens is one of the most important responsibilities for governments around the world. But with money appropriated to many different departments and agencies for many different purposes, it's not easy for a government to track how it is spent or assess the effect that it has. Imagine a world in which finance managers can see a clear picture of how public money is spent. Blockchain is making this world possible, and EY has developed a tool that enables governments to apply this technology. So what do governments need?
What they're in particular looking for is the ability to provide new forms of information exchange, information management, better data and evidence for decision making and public management, but they're looking to do so in a way that doesn't interfere with their core existing systems.
Blockchains work best as a complement to existing infrastructure systems. Blockchain should be the glue that lets siloed systems work with each other so that, one government's procurement system can manage into another, agency's budget system without trying to get everybody on the same global ERP, for example. We've developed a test inside of EY. We call it kind of the 5-point test. Is a blockchain a good solution for this particular problem? Number one, are there multiple parties involved? Is it important between all of these participants to establish agreement on and trust in certain basic facts, like who has what program, how much money has been allocated? The third question we always ask is, are you managing assets of significant value? Is it important, question number 4, to have a reliable record of all the transactions that are going on? And then lastly, is it useful to have some level of visibility across the network? And again, I think any central government authority would say, absolutely, we want to know at any time where the budget is as a whole.
So how might this work in practice? Under current systems, for a government to understand the outputs and outcomes that result from the money they spend on education, there is a long and complex process of asking different agencies to collect and report complex financial and non-financial information. However, using blockchain technology, the original appropriation is tokenized, and tokens tracked as they are transferred, subdivided, and spent all the way down the education delivery system. Each time a token moves through the chain, for example, from a program devised by the Education Ministry to a school board, it can be reconciled and consolidated for financial reporting purposes, and at the same time integrated with information on the school board's performance. This allows government to see at any moment where the money is being spent and what is being achieved.
So we're seeing really great applications for procurement and spend management with blockchain because, first of all, anytime you procure something with a blockchain across multiple organizations like government entities or networks of private companies, you've got a complete record of everything that went on. And what we find over and over again is agencies are great at negotiating volume discounts. They're terrible at actually keeping track of how much volume they've procured. And so they can't get the value that they've spent. With a blockchain, instead of having we think the average price will be about 75 cents, we can actually have an algorithm look up all the procurement that's been done so far under that contract and then correctly calculate exactly the correct price.
It works in complement to these existing systems, and so I don't have to face a large-scale IT IT transformation, and yet I can still have an incredible improvement in the ability to provide integrated financial, non-financial performance information. And why am I interested in that? It will improve my ability to discharge my public accountability responsibilities, better public reporting, better transparency, which is, of course, what democracy and governments are all about. But just as importantly, it provides me a better evidence base to make the sorts of decisions that are required to improve the delivery of public service.
Now, another artifact that can be stored on blockchains are non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. These are blockchain-based tokens that have unique identifiers, and those can be linked to digital or physical assets of various types. So they are not interchangeable with other tokens. So one Bitcoin or one Ether on Ethereum, or one type of cryptocurrency in another can readily be changed, just as dollar bills are totally fungible. But these tokens are not. They can be created by recognized and authorized authorities. Because they're on the blockchain, they can't be altered, so they can't be faked. And it can be used for such things as driver's licenses, permits, professional certifications, and product certifications for quality, source, fitness for use, and so forth. In a large extent, blockchain is the future of identity. We can tokenize such identity documents as driver's license and social security cards and health insurance cards, and easily and securely confirm these documents digitally without having to exchange actual physical documents. They can be created and stored immutably on blockchains, and since they're programmable, the authentication of that identity data can take place between a blockchain and the issuing authority seamlessly and securely. This leads to the opportunity for blockchain-based voting.
The time has come to bring voting into the 21st century. Let's be honest, no one likes searching for their polling place, waiting in long lines when they arrive. And when the ballots are cast, can we even be sure they get counted correctly? We can do better. And at Follow My Vote, we've figured out just how to do it. We threw out all preconceived notions about the way voting is done today and imagined how it should be done tomorrow. It was immediately clear that an honest election needs to be verified from end to end, so there was no choice but to bring it online. Leveraging blockchain technology in combination with elliptic curve cryptography, we've broken open the ballot box to allow everyone to count the votes, all without compromising privacy or security. Instead of waiting in line, imagine voting from the comfort of your own home on your own device, and even following your vote into the ballot box to confirm that it was cast as intended and counted as cast. Online voting. You want it, you got it. Finally, online voting. Follow My Vote. Pass it on.
Now, this is just one of a number of different tools and approaches that are being developed for blockchain-enabled voting. And of course, one of the great debates in politics in the US and around the world for that matter is between ease of voting to allow everybody who is authorized to vote to be able to do so quickly and easily, and security of voting to control to ensure that only those authorized to vote are able to vote, to do so. And those have worked against each other. The easier we make it, the less secure it's claimed to be. The more secure we make it, the harder it's claimed to make it to vote. With blockchain-enabled voting properly implemented, we can gain both at the same time, which will provide for some very interesting political discussions in the years to come. We already see efforts like VOATS running a blockchain for West Virginia military personnel and out-of-state travelers. The Illinois Blockchain Initiative uses blockchain to secure voting registration information. Every voter could see precisely how their vote was recorded. Losing candidates could check the totals and confirm there's no missing or unaccounted for or illegitimate votes. Recounts would, in essence, become completely unnecessary. Totals would be available immediately upon closing of the polls. And it could support any method of voting, from machines to paper ballots, mail ballots, and so forth, although certainly it would be great to be able to use your biometrics to uniquely identify yourself via fingerprint, facial recognition, and so forth, and then be able to cast your vote from your smartphone at your own convenience. And ultimately, I believe we will get there. Additional blockchain use cases include such areas as financial management, licenses and certification. For example, Utah is already exploring this with driver's licenses. IT assets. In Texas, they have a proof of concept for managing software licenses and plates. Supply chain management, pilot for facial recognition in Tennessee, appropriated funds as discussed in the brief video clip that we saw. And a number of different states are already working on this: California, Delaware, Illinois, New Jersey, North Carolina, Texas, Vermont, and probably others that I'm unaware of. Now, there's a link at the bottom of this slide, which is, when you get the PDF, will take you to a website that is a little out of date. It was updated last year, but it does show at least a number of the state regulations on virtual currency and blockchain technology that may be relevant. Hopefully that's a useful resource for you. All of this is part of digital transformation. Digital transformation means, though, that you need to discern, one, is the technology that you're considering ready for your use? At the same time, is your organization ready to take advantage of the technology? Because unless you're willing and able to make the changes in your infrastructure and your processes that enable you to take full advantage of that technology, you may not yet be quite ready for it. Digital transformation is not about force-fitting new technologies into your existing business processes, and it's certainly not about paving the cow paths by simply taking all your existing paper-based processes and making them digital with all the same steps and delays and errors. It's not about making your current model marginally more efficient. It's much more about reimagining how you could do things differently. Your business model, even how you interact with the ecosystem as a whole, and understanding how new technologies then can affect working processes, and then determining which of these technologies, what combination of these emerging technologies, and how they could be applied to implement that new vision. But all of this really doesn't matter unless you have a broader, innovative planning process to deal with strategic disruptions. And by strategic disruptions, I mean everything from pandemics to climate change to political disruptions. Could be global geopolitical disruptions like the impact that the war in Ukraine has had on global supply chains, or it could be local political disruptions like a change of party and power in the state legislature or the governor's chair. And emerging technologies themselves can in turn be disruptive, both in terms of how they affect various different processes and people's expectations. One of the things that's very important for governmental agencies to do is look at the impact of these potential strategic disruptions from a risk-adjusted perspective. You need to think about both the likelihood and the severity of the disruption. Now, if the disruption is not very likely, and if it were to happen, it wouldn't be really severe, well, that's obviously not a high priority to deal with. And if it is happening, or extremely likely to happen, and is clearly going to be extremely severe, well, obviously that is a very high priority to deal with. But the problem that most organizations have is they spend way too much time with a misdirected focus on those things that are very likely to happen, but aren't really going to strategically disrupt operations. What if we have this or that kind of an unanticipated problem? What if we have bad weather affect us in the form of forest fires or tornadoes or floods? Well, those things happen. That's not a strategic disruption. These are things that should be planned for on an ongoing basis. Much more critical are those things that are not very likely to happen, but if they do, are going to make a huge disruption. A study was done in Europe about 2 years ago at this time, asking 100 different organizations across Europe, governmental agencies and private sector businesses and so forth, where in your strategic plan did you allow for the possibility of a global pandemic to impact your organization? 99 out of 100 organizations said, we hadn't a clue. We had to completely start from scratch to figure out what to do. The only exception was the military, NATO. And NATO said, of course we had a strategy for the possibility of a global pandemic. And as soon as those indicators took place to allow us to determine that this was something that was in fact likely to happen in the very near term, we immediately set all of our switches to change our plans so that we operate under the conditions of a global pandemic taking place and adjust appropriately. One of the famous sayings in the military is that the first casualty of war is the plan. And if the way you do planning for your IT operations, for your state and its governmental agencies, is the traditional static, once a year, let's get a group of people together in a room, we'll spend 3 or 4 days looking at our current plans, looking at the mostly financial projections of our plans for the next year or so, make a few tweaks around the edges, sprinkle holy water on it, and say, we've now updated our strategic plan. And if that's the case, then yes, as soon as something truly strategically disruptive comes along, the plan's going to be in the wastebasket. But there's a different approach that you can take that is called dynamic transformational planning or dynamic digital transformation. And that is where you not only take the old saying of think globally, act locally, but you add to it, think long-term, act short-term. The idea is that you establish a series of goals to leverage your core competencies, your resources, and your capabilities to address the changing needs and demands of your constituents while simultaneously addressing current and potential strategic threats and disruptions. Now, to achieve any goal, you've got to have a plan. But there can certainly be more than one plan to achieve a goal. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So, for example, to make it simple, if your goal is simply you want to drive home from work, well, plan A might be to take the expressway, because that's usually fastest. But plan B might be to take surface streets for any of a variety of reasons. Each plan has advantages and disadvantages, and you might even choose to switch plans partway through. So, for example, if there's an accident on the expressway, you could switch to the take surface street plans, let's get off at the next exit, rather than get stuck on the expressway, spending 45 minutes trying to get that exit that is only half a mile ahead. Now, in order to be able to execute any plan in business or government, you need resources, skills, capabilities, money. And that means that you have to have achieved some set of sub-goals to execute that plan. So to achieve those sub-goals, you have to have sub-plans. How are you going to achieve those sub-goals? And it devolves on from there. Now, this sounds a bit abstruse when you're simply trying to define it verbally, but there's a methodology called a plan goal graph. It's a very useful way to think about this. You have an overall plan for managing your organization and a series of goals, all of which must be met in order to achieve that overall plan. Now, for any given goal, you may have 1, 2, or more sub-plans to achieve that goal. In some cases, some of your sub-plans might help you address more than one goal, and that's something to keep in mind. And again, each of these sub-plans can have sub-goals that must be achieved in order to execute that plan. Now, in a real-world environment, what you're looking at are developing a plan goal graph that may be 5 to 10 layers deep. So typically this is going to have anywhere from several dozen to maybe even hundreds of nodes. But it's an excellent way. It's a tool that can be developed within a few days by the right team. And you can assign variables to balance the relative values of those goals and to measure the costs of executing those plans. One of the keys to measuring the cost of the plans and timing when to use what plan is to monitor the external environment very closely. And that means, that's why people use tools like Waze and Google Maps to look at the traffic situation and alternatives. It's why it's important that you as organizations continuously, not once a year in a strategic planning meeting, but on an ongoing basis, monitor for potential strategic disruptions and threats, evolving technologies and business opportunities, even if they are not yet happening. And by monitoring, it's not simply a matter of passively observing. Oh, look what they're doing over there. Isn't that interesting? All right, now back to business as usual. No, what we're talking about is proactively monitoring by defining and actively seeking indications of trigger points or inflection points that say, this is the thing that we needed to see to tell us it is time to start executing this plan. Or perhaps it's time to switch from plan A to plan B, because plan B is now more likely to give us the desirable result at a lower cost or more quickly than plan A would. In summary, dynamic transformational planning allows governmental agencies to think long-term, setting strategic goals, while still having the flexibility to shift dynamically in the short term and medium term, both in terms of how to achieve those long-term goals, and even to recognize that in some cases, those long-term goals themselves may evolve. And it can address both anticipated and unanticipated strategic disruptions, opportunities, threats, and other kinds of disruptions. Now, all of this is going to require a lot of change. It's going to require change in how your business models and interacting with your constituents, your agencies, and external trading partners work, in how your business processes work. But most importantly, it's going to require a change in your thought processes toward the notion that strategic planning is as important an ongoing business process as other such supportive functions as human resources and financial management are. It's a lot of change to absorb, but as the famed historian Henry Steele Commager put it so well over a century ago, change does not necessarily assure progress, but progress implacably requires change. I hope you'll make the changes in your organizations and your agencies and your thought processes to help your states take full advantage of these exciting emerging technologies as we move forward. Thank you so much for listening.